Welcome to the Global Liver Institute's GLI Live. This has been part of our COVID-19 response for liver patients and frankly for all of those people who are immunocompromised, or frankly all of us have been compromised in some way by this pandemic experience. My name is Donna Cryer. I am the founder and CEO of the Global Liver Institute. And as many of you know, I am a rare autoimmune patient and a liver transplant recipient. I welcome you into my home today, and I hope that you are safe in yours. And if not, I hope that this time together can provide you some sense of safety and security or peace in this unpeaceful, unquiet time. So for the past several weeks, I've had the privilege of bringing you experts who can not only help you survive during COVID-19, but hopefully can help you thrive. And our guest today certainly embodies this ethos like no one else. I'm very excited to share this time and this platform with him today. He is an engineer scientist, an entrepreneur, a colleague, and a friend who has done more for those who have gone through the experience of having feeling powerless when a family member is confronted by a disease and rising to that occasion in such a brave and remarkable way to create something that is not only impactful for their own family, but impactful for the patient family and the human family. So Jaime Heywood, welcome to GLI Live.
Donna, thank you so much. That was a wonderful intro. I'm very grateful.
So we've decided that this topic today would be on resilience. And certainly 8 weeks, at least I've been home for 8 weeks, but this has been months, frankly, of this pandemic. Resilience is, I think, a great topic. Great idea, Jaime. It seems that we would need to be able to see resilience in our nation, resilience in our democracy, resilience in our health systems, in our communities, in our families, and in ourselves. And so what does resilience mean to you, and why did you want to discuss that with us today?
Well, so in my work over the last 20 years, starting with ALS, this motor neuron disease, it's severe and deadly that my brother had, and then moving to patients like me and sort of engaging a much larger community of diseases and beginning to understand the relationship between health and disease and aging itself, which is this sort of interesting triangle. Some things began to emerge for me. And, what it comes down to is that resilience, disease or ill health is often a failure where a perturbation, something like a virus or, too much sugar or some input to the body knocks it out of alignment, self-regulation. And what we think about when we think about disease is how do we fix the problem, but we don't really think about how do we create resilience within the body to enable it to absorb problems. Because the idea that even sort of germ theory or viral theory, if you look at COVID-19, we're finding out that 80% of the people that get the virus have zero symptoms or zero observable symptoms, right? And so the question is, what is it about those people, their immune systems, their resilience, that makes them able to experience this without having that much rarer case that causes the severe flare? And it'd be great just to stop the virus and find drugs that stop the virus and find vaccines that would stop the virus. But I think the other really bigger question is what makes an individual, an organ, a cell, a community, a society, as you talk about healthcare systems, a world able to absorb shocks resiliently with the least amount of harm efficiently. And that's not a conversation. I see a lot of reacting to the sort of input to fix it, but not a lot about how do we make it so that we can have a healthy world ourselves.
It does resonate both for me as an autoimmune patient, because as you see all of these things talking about boosting your immune system, it's not really about boosting an immune system. Mine is vicious, overactive. It's about it attacks my own cells, it attacks everything. For the past 20 years, they're just like, oh, you must be sick all the time. I was like, oh no, a cold would never come near this.
Right.
It's about finding a balance. And I've talked a long time about not calling them immunosuppressants, the medications that I've been taking for over 25 years, but understanding them as immunomodulators. They're trying to find that right balance for my native immune system and what is necessary to not reject the organ that I have, so that my system is resilient. So I have enough of immune system to fight off colds and hopefully COVID, but not so much that I'm sick with everything and couldn't travel or interact in society. So it's about finding that balance. And certainly in the liver community as a whole, the liver has such regenerative properties that frankly we've gone ignored, because they're like, oh, well, the liver can just take years and years of abuse and we don't really need to focus on it or give treatments for it or do anything about that. But that's not true. So many liver diseases do have symptoms, but they might be covert while damage is being done, and the liver's ability to be resilient, to regenerate, is being overcome. And when it comes that point where it's no longer resilient, where it's damaged and it becomes fibrotic or becomes cirrhotic, and you end up in liver failure. And so how can we pull back? I think one of the biggest questions we have in the liver community, and we thinking about liver health, is how can we maintain that resilience? That how can we harness those regenerative properties, really understand them better, so that we can either maintain or restore that resilience?
Well, there's several things, and I'm not, and my expertise is more in neurology than in liver, but there's several things in what you said that I want to just pick up on and amplify. One is, the liver is a central organ in our physiology, and its effective regulation and operation in each of our bodies. Mine appears to be pretty healthy, but I have friends that are early liver disease, and then and then you and I, you're dealing with something that's you're trying to keep functional. That has secondary effects. It affects everything. It affects your brain, it affects your skin, it affects your body, right? So the relationship between a healthy, functioning, resilient liver and a healthy, functioning, resilient physiology is not particularly known. More would be better. And then the second part of that I think is really picking up on in the immune system, and I love what you said about immunosuppressives versus, if you think about an autoimmune disease, there's been several times in history, the Black Plague was one of them, where it's been speculated that people with highly active immune systems were the ones that survived, fast responding, hyper responsive. And so humanity, through the plagues of the last couple thousand years, has developed overactive immune systems. My asthma is driven by something similar to that. Now then, but that's a simple statement, right? Then you go through and say, well, what does it mean to have an overactive immune system? And then you have this question of a local tissue. In the case of my asthma, it's in my upper airways. In the case of your liver, something happened. And maybe it was a virus or a bacteria, combined with a moment of stress, combined with a particular pathway in you that genetically or for whatever reason was amplified by environment. And that produced something that no longer worked right and became dysregulated, non-resilient, causing harm. And we don't really have measures for any of that in any real human being. The things that we observe, it's like coming up to a car crash, a week later and looking at it and wondering what happened, as opposed to learning that the brakes were failing or it was going too fast. So we don't understand very much about those factors. And what disappoints me is the primary focus of our work is not on that resilience, which I think would have the most benefit and the highest gain for the world, but on the late stage. How do I pull the car off the bar, off the rail? Like, I don't want a tow truck. I want to not hit the rail, right? So that's what. So I think that for a world that spends close to $1 trillion a year on tow trucks, let's call it drugs post treatment, it'd be nice to spend a little bit on just making the roads clear. And I like in the immune system, you know, if you think about strength of the immune system, how hard can you hit, right? But the more important thing is how good are your glasses so you know what to hit. Do you want to hit the virus or do you want to hit your own liver? In your case, you want to hit the virus.
Right. Absolutely. I've been 25 years and counting post-transplant, I'm very blessed to say. Um, and it astounds me and frustrates me that there are very few of the doctors I come into touch with, and now, medical students and researchers and, residents and all, some early stage, physicians and students. I'm always trying to get to them younger and younger to shape their thinking, because they don't often enough ask me how I've done so well. So there are patients who unfortunately have had multiple transplants, and they're like, oh, you're just on your first. I'm like, no, first only this one. Why am I doing so, yeah, why am I doing so well? Let's study that.
Yeah.
And I have some thoughts about it, and parts of it are all the different things I do outside of the medical system. Because I am in a very, privileged place, both from a knowledge standpoint and an economic standpoint, to put those things together. But how can we, and certainly it's a question we asked at the Global Liver Institute, how can we create a system that helps more patients be like me, be as healthy, not dead. So healthy is a different standard I have than my doctors, but really able to thrive, to to exercise, to have families, to work productively, to live long, certainly, with as few consequences as possible. What is it about either me genetically or the habits I've had or the things that I've done or the environments that I've been in that have allowed me to do so well and created this resilience? And that's what I'd really love to be able to build for more and more patients.
So I think you're describing, almost perfectly the impetus for patients like me, which we started 15 years ago,
Right.
which is how do we learn not about the sort of known treatments or known pathways, but how do we learn from the real world experience of people, what works and what doesn't? And I think it has been, well, certainly the most successful effort to date to integrate that data into something that people use and create information on. But I also, want to honor how hard that problem is. So let's do a comparison. If you think about, human life, as you said, thriving, right? Which is by the way, the name of the measure of patients like me for health outcomes. If you think about
I love that. And I think I was like patient number 5 in the
yeah,
transfer.
exactly. In the training, exactly.
Yeah.
So I mean, I love, I'm so proud of what Patients Like Me has done and the team there. And, but I also want to honor how hard this problem is for a second. So let's look at, so Patients Like Me is attempting to digitize what it means to be a healthy human being, which means you need to understand and digitize disease and health and behavior and all of these things. It's an enormous statement. So let's just look at a simpler problem. Like, how does one digitize music, and how long did it take us to learn to digitize music, right? So if you go back, 100 years or even, well, let's go ahead 100 years,
Mhm.
music was essentially non-transmittable. It was only something that you could experience in person, just like a doctor visit. Like, it was sort of like you go and, hey, that was good music, hey, that was bad music, and it was all judgment, and there was no sort of large comparison or integration. And then they sort of invented analog ways of recording music, wax, and and Edison invented all these cool things. And then there was a long period of time where but it was simple and it was one channel, and then we introduced stereo, and and now with music, after 100 years of technological optimization, you can not just record an environment and re-immerse yourself in it, though it's still not as good as the original experience, right? Not as good as going to a symphony.
Right.
But you can actually create and invent and sort of amplify it. So movies are sort of three-dimensional, and that's the evolution that we need to go through in digitizing health itself. And there are hundreds of companies and efforts that go into this in different ways. And what I am hopeful about in the problem that you're outlining is that I think there's a point in a technology disruption, like when the digital music came out. It existed for a long time before it disrupted this record industry in any way, or disrupted anything that happened. Is that it becomes cost effective and sufficiently better that it disrupts the old model. And so if you look at the iPhone, if you look at the iPod, which was this sort of huge disruption that created Napster and broke the sort of recording industry, which is the way I kind of think of the medical industry. Sort of it's a bunch of inefficient, broken systems that serving largely I hate to be blunt, serving largely itself and not its consumers, and certainly not the artists, right? So if you look at, you have the creators and you have the consumers, and the industry was taking 95% of that, right? So if you look at that, that's what healthcare is. So if you look at that in the context of healthcare, the iPod was the one that said, as a consumer, let me unitize this, let me give consumer the ability to tune and optimize, share, and create. And that built an entirely new system. I don't think we're yet able to digitize health, either at the phenotype, the human experience level, or and certainly not at the biological, which is what I'm working on now. How do you measure where your cells and your organs and your physiology is? The hundreds of measures we use in medicine they're terrible. It's like reading sheet music and thinking you're hearing a song, right?
But there are so more omics that we're looking about and able to get, as consumers, or at least as connected consumers. I wear, two wearables on the wrist. So it's amazing to me when I have conversations with my doctors and I'm like, well, I don't think that that's actually working because, and then I, give them sort of the daily sort of data from my different devices and scales. And so because it hasn't improved my sleep, because it hasn't improved, here are the objectives I've set up for me, or my hydration isn't, where it should be and whatever. So I think based on the data I'm looking at, we should change. And they're like, well, we were just going to guess. It's like, how about we do better? And so how do we put all those pieces together of the many, many sort of layered, the different omics, as well as the different, I love how people are discovering social determinants of health, as if we all don't have a social determinant of health and a social construct to how healthy we are. Certainly, if we're seeing it in a COVID environment where people who live in poverty areas, areas of high density, areas where they, are essential workers and have had to go out and leave their homes and be exposed multiple times, and have, myriad concurrent health conditions and vulnerabilities already. Well, why are we surprised that they are disproportionately being infected by COVID and dying and having, the very severe effects? If we really look at all of those layers of what we know to produce health, those things were absent. And so I think that we have to go use this situation, use this pandemic to go back and really filter through, okay, these were how can we address all of these vulnerabilities, all of these fragilities, all of these things that made communities as a whole and people less resilient? When we have county by county data, why is this county, when we start testing efficiently, but why is this county doing better than the county next door?
Right.
What has made them more resilient to this same assault, to this same virus? And how can we build that in so that everybody, we're not going to unpack density, but what does it mean in terms of contract chasing, or how we work differently, or stagger hours, or social distancing, or disinfect, or put in some other, how can we drive innovation based on what we are learning during this time about what actually created vulnerability? Thus the flip side is what can create some strengths and resiliencies for everybody, since now we finally acknowledge that we're interconnected. And so the illness of the homeless person on the street and his inability to be housed affects everybody, from even in the penthouse level. So we're going to need to have that person have not just cycle through the ER and come out back to the street to be infected, but we're going to need to create a better system of of housing. So housing care is healthcare. Nutrition is healthcare. And so redefining what our public health infrastructure, and recognizing that our financial health is only as strong as our public health is a new concept for many. It's an exciting world for advocates like me to be in, now that people are receptive, at least for a window, to that conversation. So help me figure out more things that we can be saying from your brilliant mind.
So no, well, what I like immensely about what you're saying is, I think that there's a moment here where everyone in the world is taking a breath and saying, okay, I went to work every day. I was under these different pressures, these different stresses, and it suddenly shifted for this significant reason, right? And that's a moment where we can all sit back and say, well, what is purpose? And when you asked me to do this, we talked about it. I sent you the Finding Nemo quote, which is, Marlin is saying to Dory, like, I just don't ever want anything to happen to him. And Dory replies and says, well, why would you want that? And I think there's in that, like, when you talk about resilience or what problem we're solving for, what I find uncomfortable is we're not having a discussion about what we want. And obviously I want my parents healthy. I want my loved ones and my community healthy. But I also don't want to live in a padded room. And, and I don't raise my children living in a padded room. My children are out, climbing a tree, and they could get hurt climbing this tree. So life, the purpose of life is at one level to live, right? And to define living, it has, and we can each define living in our own way, but it has its own, it has a social component, it has a risk taking, it has an invention, it has you and I have missions to try and make the world better. We invest massive energy in that, trading off against other things that we could do for people we love in different ways. So this idea of life is living. And when we talk about resilience, what I'd like to think about is what creates the maximal opportunity to live. And that, when we look at what a community does better or worse, there are some things that need to be asked here, which is to say, clearly delaying the virus is better than having it now. But there is a question of how much better, against what's the consequence of that in different ways, right? And so in the end, an interesting question: will the more resilient community be the ones that went through, like Italy did in some areas, and now has, as much as 50% of the people have been exposed to having the virus, and they are now essentially approaching, not yet, they are approaching herd immunity. Will those communities that took it hard and fast end up living more because they will be back, and then maybe the ones that sort of ideally isolated will be spending 2-3 years in lockdown, and they will not be able to re-enter the world because they are afraid. And so the question is, what's the and I don't have answers to this, just to say that when I hear people tell me absolutes, like like we must do this or we must do that, those absolutes are absent context. And what I know, having worked with so many patients that are going through, life-threatening choices, that if you go back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? It's this false assumption. Yes, we want to breathe. We all need to breathe, and then we all need to use the restroom, and then we all need to eat, and then we all this is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. In the end, we all want to self-actualize. And I think that what Maslow might have gotten a little bit wrong is that in the moment, yes, breathing is the urgent one. But I think we are all balancing the entire hierarchy of needs at all times. And I think they all weigh in at all times. And so I trade off, you trade off risks, financial health risks, to fulfill ourselves. And as a society, and a society built on liberty, or a society built on I love the Declaration of Independence, like, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. If that is the mission of us, if that is the mission of us individuals, that equation can be written, and then the choices we make to do that. So again, I want to ask the question: what's our goal? And then what are the variables that affect our goal? And then the last part that no one really talks about is what's the time frame of those variables? So
Right.
I have 50 highly productive, healthy years expected on my lifetime. I'm not sure I want to blow a year of it doing not knowing my parents that I love. I mean, that's a that choice we should make thoughtfully. I'm not saying I know the answer, but we're not being thoughtful. We're being reactionary.
I would maybe channel the words of the great Stan Lee, as spoken by Uncle Ben to Peter Parker. With great power comes great responsibility. And so I think that with particularly for Americans and our love of liberty and of freedom, it does come with a responsibility to ourselves, but to our communities and to our fellow person to wear masks until we get the testing and really know who is asymptomatic, who has it, who doesn't have it, who has had it. I think that CNN showed something yesterday where in states that have reopened, where have people gone? What have they been waiting for when the doors open? Where'd you go? And the nail salon was the top thing. And I was not surprised. I had actually, my team knows, I had, been floating an article, open transplant centers before nail salons. And they were like, Donna, that title doesn't, I was like, I'm telling you, I know what I know. And then CNN came with the data. And so I think that certainly as we're putting together, what does this great reopening mean? And what does it mean certainly for people with liver disease or underlying respiratory issues or, or immunocompromised? I know one thing, what it doesn't mean is going out in this first blast. I think what it means is, and the signs that I'm looking for and helping to instigate in, in this new world, in this new normal, is more testing, is contact tracing. I love to see, I think it was GM that has, these watches that beep if you're in 6 feet proximity of a coworker. So how do we redesign the public transit? How do we redesign the workplace for this next period of time so that we don't have a second wave and overwhelm hospitals and health systems? Because that's important in and of itself, so that people can continue to get non-COVID care. Because our diseases didn't stop. People's cancers, tumors didn't stop growing. People didn't stop needing transplants or other things while this was all happening. So we have to be able to stand up health systems that can handle some level of COVID-19 infection that will be ongoing with reopening regular care. And I don't call it elective care because nobody wants to like a knee replacement is only elective if you don't really care about walking. It may be non-emergency care, but there's a lot of care that still needs to be delivered to people. So how can we, rationally in a real and a data-driven way, recognizing all of those needs that you outlined so well that people do have to actualize themselves and to be part of a larger community in a way that is rational for the time. And I don't think we've achieved that yet, but I look forward to working with you and others on that.
So I think you outlined a great question there. I have a couple of very strong thoughts about this though.
And we'll end on those thoughts.
So the first is, so I'm pretty deep in the sort of frontline data and some of the models being built and the testing and I'm doing pretty connected conversations on that. I will say in my 20 years of doing advanced science, I am very uncomfortable with the degree to which people are describing the certainty of information that I know is not certain.
Yes.
So I am.
Models are only as good as the data, and we know the data is being reported in so many different ways.
Yeah. So, but my point about that is, when you talked about having great power comes great responsibility. I am uncomfortable with the degree to which the public health community has
Mhm.
declared a massive change in the structure of our society with a level of uncertainty that I would never operate with as a scientist. So
Right.
I am uncomfortable that we do not know what we believe we know, and that our certainty in another way of quickly saying that is that I think that this is one of those cases where acting strongly on limited information can often do more harm than good. And so I'm uncomfortable with the false certainty of the science. The second thing I would say is that, look, at the end of the day, whatever happens here, what I care about is what happens next. And I know how, with the people I work with, to build something that can actually measure and understand the physiology so that next time this happens, we actually know, so that we know what's happening, how it's transmitted, how it affects us, how we manage it. I think in the end, this will end up being something we focused on, but as a more normal event than we have experienced as a society. And we have radically shifted our society for its purpose. I want to be prepared next time so that we have a more responsive and thoughtful society so the data exists. And I'm not sure in the current environment, the current time frame, and sadly with the current politicalization of sort of really unknown models and information and certainty, that we're going to make very good choices right now. And that's depressing to me. So I just want to get ready for next time. That's my plan.
Well, I have an essential optimism because I know people like you. And, I wouldn't have known this or sensed this when I was a little girl, or maybe I wouldn't have believed it to be true. But the world is what we make it. And
Yeah.
so I'm so thankful that I get to make this new world during COVID and post-COVID with someone like you. So Jaime, thank you for joining us today on GLI Live. And to everyone, please, you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and on Twitter, and join us next week for our next fascinating conversation.
It's been an
Thank you.
honor and a pleasure.